All right. Hi, everybody. Two more people coming, I guess, or somebody coming back and then somebody else coming in. It's obviously a very small event. I have a very hard time believing that any group
we don't like nationalism. Okay.
Thank you, actually. Oh my God. I have a very hard time believing that any group of people, big or small, would come just to hear me talk about myself and what I've done. But you're all here, and that means a lot to me. What are your names? Since there's like three of you here. Charlie, I know you know because you're my best friend.
Yeah, but they don't know Charlie.
This is Charlie. Charlie's one of my very good friends. And what are your names?
I'm Ethan.
Ethan.
Roy.
I'm Olivia. What brings you here today? Just wonder, like out of curiosity. Just in like your journey here, or like how?
I have no interest in following Roy.
Okay.
I've been trying to find more, like, having more involved with work that I go home and enjoy and more age cultural shoot, like more really cool stuff. Like 2 weeks ago, and I was like, okay, that is definitely something I'm interested in.
Cool.
This is the first event that has been posted by that page that
Okay. Okay.
They'll be able to make.
That's a lot of pressure. All right. Yeah, Don't Shoot Portland is the most critical iteration of Black Lives Matter in Portland. Don't Shoot Portland has been critical to my development as an activist. But today I'm going to be talking a lot about my story as a person and how the different identities that I have influenced my work, specifically around chronic illness. I have cystic fibrosis, if you don't know what that is, and you will learn what it is soon. But being chronically ill is something that I deeply suppressed for a very long time, because I had the privilege, because I was very healthy, to be able to ignore the fact that my health was deteriorating. But once I stopped doing that, I feel like it became critical to my analysis and to the way I wanted my work to develop. So talking about me, and then talking about how it's influenced my work, and if you identify with any of what I say, then we can have a little discussion afterwards. So start off with this anecdote. On December 19th, I had a really bad doctor's appointment. It was my first appointment on the adult side of pulmonary medicine at Oregon Health and Science University, which is where I've received my care for cystic fibrosis since I was born. I'm recently 21, so therefore I'm past the threshold for admittance into adult care. Cystic fibrosis is a genetic, chronic, progressive, and terminal illness. This means that I was born with CF due to my parents both carrying the gene recessively. It is long-lasting, it gets worse with age, and it will probably kill me unless something terrible happens before it gets to that point. What it entails is that I have an excessive amount of mucus in my body, specifically in my lungs and my digestive tract. I require intense maintenance on my lungs to be able to breathe, and I have a very fragile digestive tract, which is prone to causing me pain due to an inability to digest fats and proteins because of the mucus. At the same time, people would say I have a very high metabolism, so I also require a very, very high fat, high calorie diet. I should be eating double what is suggested for most people a day. And so why this recent appointment was bad, the scores on my pulmonary function tests are lower than they've ever been, PFTs for short. PFTs measure the capacity for the lungs to transfer large volumes of air through the body very quickly. There's a specific measurement called FEV1, which indicates how much air is moved through the lungs in the first second of the largest exhale during this test. So you take a tube, you take 3 normal breaths, and then you go, when you breathe out as fast as you can. And so the FEV1 score, which is the most important score, measures how much air moves through in the first second of that big breath. What occurs is transportation of air is converted into a percentage that becomes your FEV1 score. And for a very long time, especially when I was extremely physically active as a dancer in middle and high school, my baseline PFT score was around 120%, which is a score that would be favorable for many adults who are not terminally ill. I've been admitted to the hospital. They've made me go to the hospital and be on an IV for antibiotics when I've had a score of 100% because it was such a significant drop. So this is to say that my average PFT score at my last appointment was about 91%. My baseline now hovers around 100%, really probably closer to 95%. Which I hope I have the power to fix, but I'm not certain and honestly not very hopeful that I do. My new doctor jarringly described this to me as my moving into the next stage of cystic fibrosis. The first being a really high baseline with high capacity to recover from exacerbations of the staph in my lungs. The second stage is hitting lower lows and still being able to bounce back to high lung function, but more infrequently. The third phase, which is what he identified me as moving into, is essentially a just general blow to my lung function, explaining the 30% being knocked off from when I was a senior in high school. And I was a senior in high school in 2014, so it hasn't been that long. So moving way backwards, I grew up in Beaverton. Father is black, my mother is white, parents are divorced. I'm a student of Portland State. I'm a senior studying child and family studies. I have CF, and in the last few years of my life, I feel like these identities have mostly served to form my identity as an activist. Throughout my childhood, the location these identities placed me in was something that seldom occurred to me. I didn't think about it. If anything, they seemed like non sequiturs within the trajectory of my life. In Beaverton, I was isolated from blackness, aside from my father, who I would see on the weekends, where I loved very much, but he was not an integral part of my life. I was surrounded by whiteness. I had a plethora of social and intellectual capital, which kind of separated me from kind of the place that we place a lot of black people in our society. And I suppressed the reality of my inevitably decaying health so intensely, because first I'm lucky to have been very healthy for most of my life, and because I could suppress it in that way, I rejected the idea deeply of connecting with anybody who had cystic fibrosis. People with CF can't be in the same room, so there's that. But also, like, I just didn't want to connect with people online. I did not want CF to be a part of my life. I did not want to have friends who were also chronically ill. I just wanted it to be a separate thing. And so I suppressed that deeply. Essentialist constructions of race haunted my everyday life as a teenager. I spent the majority of my days in high school internalizing jokes from maybe while meeting friends about how black I was or was not. Everything I learned about race told me that I had no place to fit in this society. I didn't act black, I didn't look white, and in a majority white school and household, this left me with little room to explore what it means to cross the boundaries of two racial communities. I now understand this isolation as an iteration of capitalistic alienation, rooted in toxic, homogenous ideas about identity. In order to separate and stratify people based on these various identities, you must rigidly define them. It is within this framework that I do not fit, and because of this, it took an extremely long time for me to contextualize my race within my life. Because of very specific definitions of what it looks like to be disabled, and the stigmatization that comes with being disabled, I opted to ignore the unique situation I found myself in terms of my health, the important perspective on life that the sick body I live in gives me. I grew up dancing at an art school, a culture which so obviously prioritizes the capacity of one's body, which I feel further forced me to ignore the reality of my body's inherent weakness. Isolation from myself was inherent to me. It would be through feeling connection to others based on common identity, understanding the system through which I felt isolated, forcing myself to accept the ways in which my body is subversive to capitalistic societal standards, and a newfound ambition to develop liberatory strategies towards justice that I would reclaim myself in my body. A few years ago, I would have never imagined that these identities, which I felt so separated from, would come to define the entirety of how I orient towards the world around me. It completely shaped my conception of justice, a word whose weight I didn't even understand or begin to care about until the beginning of my adult life. So how I came in to this work is I graduated high school. The summer I graduated high school was the summer that Michael Brown was killed by Darren Wilson in Ferguson, Missouri. He was in the street for 4.5 hours, and protests erupted in Ferguson. I didn't know what was going on. I remember seeing it on the news. I really had very little knowledge of what protests even meant. Looking back, I had very little knowledge of the civil rights movement. I just did not have a very strong conception of Black history at all. I knew it had to do with the police. I knew it had to do with somebody being killed. It felt so politically detached from me. I felt like it was too complicated for me to understand. But my friends who used Tumblr a lot were starting to kind of get woke to these ideas, and that's how I got introduced to these politics, was through Tumblr, through my friends. And then once I entered college, I took a race and social justice class, and most people in that class were not very into it, but I feel like I was discovering the basis for so much of my life, for so much of my father's life, and it was very important for me to understand. And that was a very important moment for me. So I'm taking a race and social justice course, and now there are protests in Portland in relation to Michael Brown. and I'm wanting to get plugged in so badly. I remember watching people's live streams of the protest, and I just truly did not know the logistics of how to know when a protest was happening, how to know who to know, when you would like to get involved in any kind of organizing. I didn't understand the protests were organized in the first place at all. And finally, I was studying, I'm very into like coincidences, and I feel like this is so like, this story really messes with my head. I was studying with this girl I had this class with, and this is the only time that we had ever hung out one-on-one. And she finds the event for May Day, so like Workers' Day, on her phone. It was after the killing of Freddie Gray in Baltimore, whose spine was broken by 6 police officers, and they put him in the padding wagon without a seatbelt, and he died. And none of those officers were indicted. But she showed me this event. She said this protest is going on May 1st, and I had no idea what May 1st was. And she says, "Do you want to go?" And I was like, "Yes, I will go with you." She didn't share the event with me. I didn't RSVP. I just remembered May 1st in the park blocks at PSU. And she said, "Yep, I'll go. We'll go. We'll meet up together." I invited my best friend and my friend at the time, Sydney. But the girl I was studying with did not go to the event. She didn't show up. I went. And I would meet many people who were in the Portland State University Student Union, which would become the first organization that I would join. And I heard people talking about these issues that I'd just been unpacking, these issues that are becoming very important to me in defining the entire way I saw the world. Like racial injustice was becoming the only framework through which I saw the world at this point. And I just felt like I had something to say. Alyssa was emceeing the event. She was being very loud and inspiring. I didn't have any Black female role models in my life, aside from a dance teacher that I had in high school, but I had never even had a Black teacher. I was very estranged from my Black female family members, so just seeing Black women speaking out was very integral to my development. And I got up and I made a statement about the root of this injustice being tied to slavery, and looking back, it was a very kind of elementary reading of what was happening, but it was true, and it felt very important for me to say, and I felt very empowered. I had never spoken publicly on any of these issues in this way, at a rally on a megaphone. I had never done that in my life, and I just, in that moment, knew I had to do that. And so, very quickly, Alyssa and Teresa Rayford, the leader organizer of Don't You Portland, took me under their wing, and I kept seeing them at different actions, and I didn't understand that they wanted me to continue to come. I just thought I kept running into them, or I just thought like when I would go to events that I would keep, or I just ended up being in close proximity to them, but they wanted to bring me in. I think a few days later, there was an anniversary protest for a woman named Kendra James who was killed in Portland in 2003. She was killed in her friend's car. They claimed she was trying to flee. She was shot to death. She was unarmed by a police officer who they claimed that she was having a sexual relationship with. She was pregnant. And it had to be the 11th anniversary of her killing. And we marched through the street, and Alyssa was leading the protest, and she was becoming very emotional. She was crying. She could not leave the chance anymore. And I just decided that I had the capacity to lead the protest. Like, I knew what the chants were. I could raise my voice, and so I grabbed the microphone and I led the march. And this would all snowball into Alyssa coercing me into joining the Portland State University Student Union. At the time, the Portland State University Student Union was working on pushing back against the PSU Board of Trustees, who were very insidiously pushing through the armament of our campus security, the deputization of armament of our campus security. There was not consensus on our campus about whether they should be armed or deputized, and there was really only a large amount of dissent from students, from staff, and from faculty. And there was a 2.5 year period before the campaign that would become Disarm PSU even started, where students were pushing back against this measure being implemented at all. But on June 15th, they approved to arm and deputize our campus security. And the meeting before that vote at the Board of Trustees meeting was the first student union meeting that I went to. I helped to organize the action. I helped to think about what we would say in the boardroom, how we would get our members on the speakers list at the board meeting, the signs that we would hold. And I had never done that before. I had never organized an action before. But then they armed campus security. And that would snowball into a very large campaign called Disarm PSU that would happen over the next year and a half. And I went from having very little knowledge of what it means to organize a campaign, to be in an organization, to be an activist, to being a lead organizer of Disarm PSU in the next 3 months. That summer, I basically was going through boot camp. I didn't think of it as that then, but I was basically going through activist boot camp as we geared up to have a major action where we interrupted the president's convocation speech to all the freshmen at PSU to say that the school that you are coming to is arming their campus security against the will of students, staff, and faculty. If you are not okay with this, you should come outside and join us and protest with us instead of sitting here and listening to Wim Pavel, who is our former very rich, white, wealthy president who's an immigrant from the Netherlands, who tries to use his identity as somebody from the Netherlands to identify with immigrants from South, Central America and Mexico, who says that board members are richer because they're adults and makes fun of students for being food insecure. If you should leave his speech and come join us if you are against our school arming our campus security against the will of students, staff, and faculty. And the student union SUSU went from being an 11-person organization to a 40-person organization. And over the next year and a half, we would have protest after protest, after rally, after rally, after event. Event after event. Talking about how the school had failed, how they had ignored that the faculty senate voted unanimously, I think, against arming campus security. How over 50% of the student body said that they might be so that they were not okay with the police with our security being armed. How our board of trustees was chaired by a former general executive of Nike. How we only had out of the 13 members, we only had one student representative, one staff representative, and one faculty representative. And those 3 people were 3 of the people who voted against arming campus security. Our actions escalated. Our like I said before, our membership grew 3 or 4-fold just in the first month of that campaign. We had 40 people in our meetings almost every Monday for the entire year. And we went from having our little interruption at the president's convocation speech to those founders of Black Lives Matter, Alicia Garza and Opal Tometi, coming to our school and letting Melissa speak on the stage and promoting Disarm PSU, to a 500 student walkout that we would hold on May 10th, 2016. But it would not pan out. The PSU campus security would not be disarmed. They are still armed. We are almost at the end of the 3-year rollout, the 3-year $1.5 million rollout, and they continue to be armed, despite the fact that most students, when I talk to random students about the fact that they are armed against the will of students, they are appalled. But this campaign drastically changed the culture around thinking about our police officers on campus. This campaign also sparked a large contingent of people on the right on our campus, and really polarized political action on our campus. But it was critical to me because it was my first time organizing anything, and built up built up my capacity to organize large events. While I feel like I was not extremely politically developed through this work, well, I was politically developed through this work, but I feel like this work developed me more as an organizer than it did politically. Near the end of my time in the student union, where I left the student union in December of 2016, I was really feeling like I was at a dead end with the work, especially after the election. I feel like a lot of activists in Portland felt very lost after the election of Donald Trump, trying to either reinvent the wheel or trying to get people on board with what they were doing, and people not wanting to do anything that wasn't explicitly Trump related. And the student union was definitely in that pocket of just being stuck and not knowing where to go, not knowing how to orient ourselves, and not knowing what to do next. And I felt very burnt out. I've been taking on a large portion of the work for the entirety of my time in the student union, except for like at the end when I was thinking about leaving. And I have been going to meetings of socialist alternatives, Socialist Alternative is the U.S. Branch of the Committee for Workers International, which is a international socialist organization. So I've been going to socialist alternative events. I had been thinking about the politics and what I saw next. I thought, like, the work that we're doing is not getting wins. How do I get myself involved in a movement where I feel like we can make significant gains? So aside from socialist alternative having been integral to winning 15 now in Seattle, to actually having a representative in Seattle, aside from that, I was beginning to honestly move away from identity politics and develop an idea around how, and this is a new idea to me, that nobody except for the ruling class can benefit under capitalism, and how interconnected my struggle was with everybody around me. And I felt like socialist alternative was a way for me to manifest that. And this would develop more as I finally begin to really understand the nuances of my racial identity, really understand what it means to live in the body that I live in. So I would eventually leave SUSU, and overlapping with that, I would join Socialist Alternative, and that was a very big deal for me. And while SUSU gave me definitely my strong organizing chops, I felt like Socialist Alternative gave me my strong political chops. So through Socialist Alternative, it's been slow going for me, but my biggest piece of work that I've done through Socialist Alternative has been the organizing of the Me Too March and Rally and March on January 20th, the anniversary of Trump's inauguration. We brought 700 people into Pioneer Square. We had people sharing their stories of trauma and sexual assault and violence and degradation, and then of redemption and hopefulness and survival in front of 700 people in public. People saying things that they said they had never said before, and it was extremely powerful. And I was one of the lead organizers of that, and that was kind of after leaving the organization that I felt so deeply emotionally invested in, and after being in this organization for a year and a half where I felt like I was learning a lot but nothing was really happening, that was a very critical moment where I felt like I really had combined the two things that I have been working so hard on, which is my capacity to organize and my capacity to analyze things in a dialectical way, and really just really express the political or the politics that I've been trying so hard to learn and to express through my work. So the two biggest lessons that I feel like I've learned through organizing so far is that nobody can come into struggle through shame or embarrassment. People have to feel that they have a stake in what they're doing, and they have to feel empowered. I feel like there is a very large tendency in this work to immediately cast anger against people who do not have the same politics, who are on their way but are missing something, who are getting something wrong. I am guilty of that. But what I know, just thinking about myself and thinking about the people that I've brought into this work, are people whose minds I've changed. I know that nobody can do this work if they feel ashamed, if they feel small, if they feel like they're doing something wrong. People come into the work when they realize that they have a stake in it. I was not compelled to do anything related to social justice until I contextualized my race in terms of my life and realized that people like me, if not myself, were at risk of violence just simply because of the color of their skin and where they lived. And I did not feel compelled to come into the work really until I felt empowered. The first time I spoke at a rally was one of the most empowering moments of my life up to that point. And so that's one of the biggest lessons I've taken away, is that people must feel empowered to come into this work. And if you're not empowering people to come into the work, then something that you're doing isn't working, I feel. And then something I've only learned recently, very recently, is the second lesson that I've learned is that you cannot effectively do this work if you ignore any part of who you are. I don't think my politics were heavily strengthened until I really tackled the nuances of my racial identity and accepted the fact that I am ill, which is an obvious fact. I go to the doctor every 3 months and I take tests to see if my lungs are working, and I do treatments every day, but until I actually acknowledge that my body is ill, that I'm sick, and I'm not going to get better, that I was not able to, I feel like, fully throw myself into the work and fully understand how complex capitalism is. And the longer I've been doing this work, the more comfortable I've been with admitting to myself and the people around me that I'm sick. I'm not going to get better, but this admittance has come with a realization that I never knew I needed to make, that my being sick is not indicative of something inherently wrong with me, that I am not just unlucky, and that if we did not live under capitalism, if we had a world that provided people with services that would meet their basic needs, that I might still be sick, but that I would know that I was taken care of, that progress in finding cures and finding effective medications for people with chronic illnesses, for people with illnesses like mine, would come a lot faster if we actually took advantage of the technological capabilities that are in this world. I would probably not be as sick as I am, and I would probably not have to accept that I was going to die much sooner than I would like to. That's just a big realization for me. Not just that I'm sick, but acknowledging that I'm sick to understand how that connects with the anti-capitalist work that I am doing. Freeing myself from the isolation from myself that I felt as a child has had to include a reclamation of my body and an admittance that I am vulnerable due to my being chronically ill. Reclamation of my body has recently been more integral to my activism, and I feel it is this case with most specially oppressed communities. What occurs under colonialism and capitalism is the exploitation and degradation of bodies. It is one thing to know this theoretically. It is a different matter to be vulnerable enough with yourself to understand the effect this has on your own body in your everyday life, and to both feel that fear that comes with that reality and to also acknowledge it and embrace it. It was not until I was able to admit to myself this vulnerability of my body in this world, because of my blackness and mainly because of my cystic fibrosis, that I was able to imagine a world in which these things did not marginalize me or make me feel isolated. Organizing for justice must force us to come face to face with this vulnerability. The pressure to ignore the stigmatization and degradation that comes from being an especially oppressed group only serves to perpetuate a silence around injustice and the neoliberal idea of hyper-individualism that tells us to simply ignore barriers embedded into our lives and pull ourselves up by our bootstraps when we don't even have boots. The admittance of my vulnerability due to cystic fibrosis is not something that I chose to unpack until I was forced to understand the rapidity with which capitalism may kill me, which only occurred this last summer. And it was also this admittance which has caused me to develop a stronger analysis of the intersections of environmental degradation, race, and chronic illness/disability in general, which I feel is often missing in our conversations, at least in terms of actually hearing the voices of those who are exceptionally susceptible to the destruction of climate change in conjunction with illnesses that I face. I feel like that is a voice that is very much missing. And once I reclaimed the fact, and once I accepted the fact that I do have the capacity to be that voice, that was a critical moment for me. And that was something that occurred to me or that I realized I had to be until I was faced with the fact that I am suffering because people are prioritizing profit over the safety of our world. In early September, I was on vacation in Philadelphia, and I felt extremely anxious at the prospect of coming home due to the poor air quality in Portland after the beginnings of the Gorge Fire. Prior to this, in early August, I had been on a trip with 3 friends in Seattle during the fires in British Columbia, and driving back home through the smog in a car with no air conditioner, which required us to have the windows down. I felt like I was breathing through a straw, and this caused me to come close to passing out multiple times throughout the 4-hour car ride. I've been extremely blessed to be abnormally healthy, as I said before, but as I discussed, my health is beginning to deteriorate, had begun to deteriorate at this time, and will most likely become increasingly worse. And it's gut-wrenching when you lose control over the ability to breathe, and it's exhausting to think about the magnitude of the forces which are causing the destruction of the earth and the destruction of my body. This anxiety was reignited when I was in Philadelphia watching the Gorge fires. Though the fire in the gorge was sparked by somebody who was extremely careless, lighting off fireworks, I was really, really bothered by the media continuing to perpetuate the lie that we are killing the earth, and that individual acts of social responsibility on the part of working and poor people are the linchpin to saving us. yes, we can make good and informed decisions about how we treat the environment, but the massively destructive symptoms of climate change are happening around us, and regular people are not at fault. Climate change is real, and millions of people across the world are suffering at the hands of those who prioritize profit over people, animals, and the earth. Our politicians refuse to acknowledge and take proper action toward climate change, so as not to lose money from corporate lobbyists. It's unhealthy for everyone, but puts certain marginalized communities at extremely high risk and harm to their body, and this is something that I had to really reconcile when I was faced with this problem myself. So hence the necessity that I accept the fact that my body is ill, so as to understand and fight back against the degradation of the planet and save myself along with everyone else suffering from chronic illness. In the beginnings of my activism, which were highly centered on the kind of work which has built the movement for Black Lives, which is great work, I did often hear kind of ultra-left arguments which posited climate change as a white issue whose advocates ignored the more human issues such as police brutality, mass incarceration, and deportation. This is a line which I followed for a long time and even heavily sympathized with as I became a Marxist, but it was only until I found myself in a position where I was terrified to be in the place where I'd lived my entire life that I truly identified with the humanity of the issue of climate change. It's a throwaway issue that white liberals used to obfuscate more pressing human issues. I refuse to live in a world where I'm not afforded what I need to thrive. And with mucus filling my lungs, I really, really, really need clean air to continue to do this work and to continue to live. We do not need individual initiative to save the earth. We need political education and to work towards mass movements which target the functionality of prioritizing profit over human bodies. We need more mass action against the fossil fuel industry. We need to be targeting politicians to speak and act on these issues in a way which isn't reformist, but with strength and numbers that say we are the people and our voices are the only voices that matter, the only voices that should be being heard in this discussion. It was very scattered, and again, I have a hard time believing that any amount of people are here just to hear my opinion on my own work, but I hope you took something from this, and it's been a very liberating process to not ignore my illness, but to embrace it, not just for myself, but to do better work that is meant to improve this deeply fucked up world that we live in. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
How many questions to Olivia?
Any questions?
Where are you moving to?
Oh, I'm moving to Southeast 37th. I forgot the cross streets. But yeah, I recently met somebody who has very low rent, and their landlords are like white hippie vegans who don't raise the rent. So